Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the second session of the online CME webinar on genomic applications in cancer. So today, Dr. Siddharth Srivastava will be joining us to talk about the molecular pathology of colorectal cancer. As you know, Dr. Srivastava is the chief scientist in molecular oncology at the Newberg Center for Genomic Medicine in Ahmedabad, India. So as you know, this is the second session. The first one was about 2-3 weeks back, where we discussed non-small cell lung cancer molecular pathology. And sorry about the reschedulement of the second session. We had to shift it to this week due to the unavailability of the resource person. But then we are happy that Dr. Srivastava is back with us and to continue with the webinar series. So before we begin, I would like to request the participants to keep your mics muted and videos switched off during the presentation. At the end of Dr. Siddharth's presentation, we will open the floor for questions and comments. So Dr. Siddharth, happy to have you back again, and thank you for joining with us today. Welcome. So over to you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nirmala, Dr. Nirmala Srisena, for inviting me or giving the opportunity to connect with such talented people and discuss aspects of molecular biology of various cancers. This time we are going to talk about colorectal cancers, but before that I really want to thank Human Genetic Unit, Faculty of Medicine, University of Colombo, and Human Genetic Society for giving this amazing opportunity. We had to reschedule because unfortunately I contacted COVID, and it took me, a little bit of time to to recover and get back. So let's start off with this talk, and I tried to put it as a role of tumor molecular pathology in management of colorectal cancers. And colorectal cancer management has become much more complex than simply giving a chemotherapy or cytotoxic chemotherapeutic drug to patients, and how molecular biology of such tumors are impacting the management. That is what we can discuss today. A little bit of a couple of slides which I had talked about in the last talk also, just so that anybody who is joining straight away in the second talk gets a primer as to how molecular oncology is setting the paradigm in molecular medicine. So management of tumor cancer patient, right from the very beginning, the molecular aspects come into picture. In couple of cases, for example, in cervical cancers, etc., even the screening part, that is where molecular tests have come into picture. But right from the blood analysis and imaging, these are the very first initial stages of diagnosing the cancer and progressing more on it. And histopathology, right there, there are cancers where molecular tests are also mandatory. And once the treatment starts, for example, radiation, surgery, and chemotherapy, along with that, even targeted therapy has become a prominent part. For example, in metastatic lung carcinomas or advanced colorectal cancers, molecular tests and thereby the targeted therapy have become the first line in the patient management. And even when the cancer progresses after first line of treatments, and again, if the oncologist is going to try systemic therapies, again the targeted therapy and molecular tests come into picture. So, right from the very beginning to very advanced stages of cancers, during all these stages, you have molecular tests and accompanying targeted therapies or immunotherapies, which are going hand in hand. So that's how even there is an addition of molecular pathologists that has come into picture. Now oncologists and histopathologists, they also share their reports with molecular pathologists, and these people suggest most appropriate tests that should be done for this patient, so that the prognosis or the diagnosis or the treatment, any which way, how the molecular test would help. And so for this to happen, a lot of things happened before. A lot of basic science and clinical research happened. In early 2000, human genome was sequenced, and after that, a huge effort went into cancer genome sequencing. And spearheading the effort is that the Cancer Genome Atlas, which is building the landscape of mutational landscapes of various tumors, such as colorectal cancers or breast cancers, different types of breast cancers, different types of lung cancers, etc. So while these efforts were going on, we also discussed last time as to how the cost of genomic sequencing dropped drastically, and like Moore's law that explains the drop in the cost of the chips which we use in computers and telephones, mobile phones, and how the drop in the cost for those chips have ushered the era of computing. But if you see the cost per genome sequencing, that cost has dropped way steeper than Moore's law. So everybody is predicting that genomic sequencing, the access to increase in access to genomic sequencing will usher the era where where genomic medicine will be practiced just as commonly as any other thing that is happening right now. So the diagnostic companies came into picture now that the cost of sequencing got dropped, and drug companies also tagged along, because with the mutational landscapes, now they knew which proteins are oncoproteins, which are the tumor suppressor proteins, and they started building newer and newer drugs to target these proteins. And these are nothing but targeted therapies or immunotherapies. And a lot of research is going on in this area. So today we'll focus on colorectal cancers, and typically a rectal bleeding or a change in bowel habit, diarrhea, constipation, or the feeling that the bowel is never getting empty, or unexplained weight loss. These are some of the symptoms why somebody even thinks of going to a doctor and asking, okay, so and that's where the initial test starts. And usually, if there is any doubt of colorectal cancers, doctors will always do a colonoscopy to see, polyps or, any sign of tumor or polyp within the intestine, the large intestine, the colon. And many times the visualization is done by CT scan. So CT scan of pelvis, abdomen, and chest is usually done. And as blood markers, the levels of carcinoembryonic antigen, CEA, that is measured. Now, CEA antigen is not recommended for screening or for diagnosing it's not the confirmative diagnosis of colorectal cancers, but it definitely is used for prognosis. So let's say if you get a colorectal cancer patient, and once you did the surgery, and if you measure the CEA level before and after, and if you don't see much change, that means the cancer is not gone. So you need to probably do the CT scan again, figure out if there is any other place where the cancer is growing, etc. So these are some of the initial processes that the doctors do while when they get when they see a colorectal cancer patient, CRC patient. And then the pathology happens. So the TNM classification system works, where T stands for tumor. So how big is the tumor, whether it has gone in the submucosa, etc. So those things are taken, those things are discussed. Then the status of regional nodes. So how many lymph nodes are affected, where the cancerous cells have reached to those lymph nodes. And then the distance metastasis, like has it metastasized to other parts, bones and other things. Uh, Now, so, at this point of time, many times people also want to find the prognosis just on the basis of this much. And there are various calculators. I'll just give an example of one of the calculators that people use. I hope you can see the screen. So, yeah. So, for example, there is the tool. This tool is from Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center. So, where you can add. Can you see my screen?
Yes, it's visible.
So you can see the overall survival probability, and where you can put the T stage, how big is the tumor. So this data you will get from your histopathology report. So let's say it's 3T3, and how many nodes are, or how many lymph nodes are affected. So let's say N1. So one lymph node was it was the N1 stage, and then how many positive lymph nodes. So you can say, let's say 2 of them, and how many were actually dissected and seen. So let's say 8. Then also the histopathology will say how did the tumor look like, whether it was well differentiated, poorly differentiated, meaning like how closely the cells of the tumor were like normal colorectal cells. So how different they were. So if they are more different, then they are poorly differentiated or moderate. So let's say we can say poorly differentiated, and the person's age is, let's say, 75 and is a female. So when you hit calculate, so it will give uh, a sort of like what is the 5-year survival. So let's say the 5-year survival here is about 52 to 59%, meaning like if you had 100 such patients, about 52 to 59% of such patients would survive for at least 5 years. So there are such kind of these calculators available. I'm just discussing how this whole disease progresses and what exactly happens in the management. So, as a doctor, so let's say, this patient came to you, and the complaint was black blood in the stool and thin pencil-like stool, and there was a sudden weight loss in 3 months. And, so then you requested the CT scan, and you could actually see the tumor, and, and then you also found that it was metastatic and it was unresectable. So it was spread so much that, surgery was not a great option. So what you do? So you go to your NCCN guidelines. These guidelines are the ones that the oncologists resort to, where how the patient management should be done is pretty much very in great details. It is discussed. So if you see here, quite a few things are written. Like the primary treatment of such patient will be, let's say, FOLFIRI or irinotecan, which is chemotherapy with bevacizumab, or with cetuximab or panitumumab, and then within brackets it is written KRAS and NRAS should be wild type gene, WT, or it could be nivolumab or pembrolizumab, but then it is written DMMR or MSI-H only, or vemurafenib. Now it has become to encorafenib if BRAF V600 mutation is positive. So we need to really, so the oncologists need to really understand that what exactly all these things are, and what tests they need to order and or request, and based on those tests, how exactly the patient management would change. So so this was how the oncologist would see. but how a molecular pathologist sees a colorectal tumor. So, on the y-axis, there is the progression of the tumor. So from normal epithelium, when it becomes early adenoma, then intermediate adenoma, then late adenoma, and finally it develops into a carcinoma. And on the x-axis, you see these molecules and how they are undergoing changes, right? So this is the cell membrane, this is the cytoplasm, and this is the nucleus, right? So when, during the earliest stages, early adenoma, etc., you will see that there are mutations or changes in genes that codes for, the gene which is called as adenopolyposis coli, APC gene. So very early, like 80% of sporadic tumors will have a mutation in APC gene, right? So this is one of the initial stages. And then, there is another when it becomes into full-blown carcinoma. You might find mutations in the MAP kinase pathway, right? We'll get to all these pathways and in details as to how how these molecules they result in colorectal cancers. So, for example, there is this signaling pathway, EGFR to GRAP2 to SOS, then RAS proteins, which could be KRAS, NRAS, HRAS protein, and then you have RAF protein, which could be BRAF, and then MEK and ERK. And these are nothing but transcriptional activators. So they go inside the nucleus, and then they can bind to the DNA of these nucleus and ask the cell or the cell cycle to go into the G1 phase, right? So the proliferation happens. Now, yeah, the other major mechanism is also the MLH proteins. So you have MSI pathways, which is microsatellite instability pathway. And if the tumor is MSI high, then it has a specific characteristic property, and it responds to immunotherapy. There is a possibility of Lynch syndromes. So I'm just discussing the major pathways or major molecular mechanisms involved in colorectal tumors, and we'll get to each one of them one by one, right? So so then I tried to overlap the genetic or the genomic tests or the investigations that should be done on the patient management, and what is a general consensus also, and what the way I look at this is uh, you can take these patients or colorectal tumors, and not all of these patients are eligible for a genomic analysis or for a genetic test. Now, which are the patients which are eligible for this? So the patients, their age, you need to figure out whether the age is less or more than 70 years, and then look at the histopathology report, right? What does it say? Does it mentions that the tumor had infiltrating lymphocytes, or was the tumor right-sided, the location on the right side of the colon, or was it high-grade histology, right? Lack of dirty necrosis, right? So all these things, they are important in categorizing the tumor as in one or the other boxes, right? So the way we have done it is that we take any advanced colorectal cancer, which is metastatic and unresectable, right? Metastatic and unresectable. So those type of colorectal tumors should be tested for two things. One, microsatellite instability, MSI, and second, BRAF, right? BRAF is, as we had seen, that it was one of the genes or one of the proteins in the signaling pathway, right? And right now we'll just go over it, and then we'll go into details as to how these boxes actually influence the patient management. So if you take MSI and BRAF, there are two possibilities in MSI test. Either the MSI test becomes MSI high, or it becomes MSI stable. So let's, for the sake of it, we'll just remember it, we'll go into these tests in details later. So either MSI will be high or MSI will be stable. And same way BRAF is a mutation. So either you have a BRAF mutation or you do not have BRAF mutation. So we will, for the simplicity, we will say it is BRAF positive. If there is a pathogenic BRAF mutation, it is BRAF negative if there is no such mutation. So we can classify all the tumors into 4 boxes. Either the tumor is MSI stable and BRAF positive, or the tumor is MSI stable but BRAF negative, right? Or the tumor is MSI high, it's not MSI stable, it is actually MSI high and BRAF positive, or the tumor is MSI high and BRAF negative, right? So these are the 4 different classifications, different boxes in which we can classify the entire, all the tumors, right? Now let's go to the first or the left boxes, which are when the tumors are MSI stable, then what happens? What are the things we need to look at? What are the mutations we need to look at? What are the genes? What are the signaling pathways that we should be bothered about it? And then we'll go to the MSI high type of tumors, right? So when we talk about MSI stable, right, then the signaling pathway that really becomes important is the one which goes from EGFR to MAP kinase pathway and eventually leads to the proliferation, right? So as I said, this is more like a relay race, right? When you have a baton, so the first player runs with the baton and gives the baton to the second player then runs and gives it to the third player, and that is exactly the way signaling molecules, they are passing on the signal. So the signal is the phosphorylation, right? There is a phosphate group which is transferred from on a protein which was not phosphorylated, and now it is phosphorylated. So this is the signal, right? So there is this protein which is called as EGFR, which we talked in great details in the last session. And EGFR is a transmembrane protein, right? So it's a protein which is partly, it has an extracellular domain, then it has a transmembrane domain, and then it has an intracellular domain, right? So in the extracellular domain, which is jetting out in the outside the cell, a lot of different ligands can bind. These are nothing but growth factors, and when the ligands bind, these so when the ligands bind, these receptors, they bind to each other, right? And as soon as the receptors bind to each other, it undergoes a conformational change, and there is a phosphorylation. There is a phosphorylation in the intracellular domain, right? And when the phosphorylation happens in the intracellular domain, and now you can see that there is a phosphate group which is bound to the tyrosine residue, right? Tyrosine is one of the amino acids. That's why these such kind of receptors are called as tyrosine receptor kinases, right? So there is a kinase, there is an enzyme that shifts a phosphate group from ATP to the tyrosine residue. And once it gets phosphorylated, it can be bound by GRB2 protein, which is bound to which a SOS protein binds, and this complex then converts a nearby RAS protein, which is, let's say, KRAS protein. These are, if you see here, we went from EGFR to GRB to SOS, and then the RAS protein comes into picture. So this RAS protein is actually, it is hinged in the cell membrane, and there is a GDP molecule. Now this GDP molecule, so a phosphate is taken from ATP, and that is attached to the GDP. So now it becomes GTP, guanosine triphosphate, and this RAS protein with GTP is an active protein, and now it transfers the phosphate because of it is active. So now it phosphorylates the BRAF protein, and then BRAF phosphorylates MEK, and then it phosphorylates ERK, and then ERK goes inside the nucleus, where it binds to certain portions of the DNA and cause the cell to proliferate, right? So this is what happens. Now, in such kind of tumors which are MSI stable, right? These kind of tumors which are MSI stable and which have BRAF either positive or negative, this is the axis which becomes extremely important, which is driving the tumor in such kind of cancers. And then how to stop it? So, what people figured was that you can take these EGFR protein and you can have these antibodies. So they generated antibodies which are now commercially available as drugs. And these are called as cetuximab. MAB is the monoclonal antibody, or panitumumab, right? So these antibodies can actually go and bind to the extracellular domain of the EGFR molecule. And once they bind to it, then it physically hinders the ligand to bind to the EGFR protein. Now, if the ligand is not able to bind, then the EGFR proteins cannot dimerize and they cannot phosphorylate their intracellular domain, and this entire chain of phosphorylation doesn't happen. So you can actually stop the signaling right here. And if the signaling is stopped right here at the EGFR level, then the entire proliferation, that entire thing stops. So, so this is a great mechanism. So such kind of patients which are MSI stable, they can be treated with cetuximab or panitumumab, but various clinical trials have happened, and the best way to use cetuximab panitumumab is to add it to a cytotoxic chemotherapeutic agent called irinotecan. So irinotecan along with cetuximab is given to the patient, and that works really well. But the most important thing in deciding whether you can use cetuximab or panitumumab is to figure out what is the status of RAS and RAF, right? What if RAS molecule or RAF molecule is already mutated, right? So let's say we take an example where KRAS or the RAS molecule is mutated. Now, what do we mean by mutated? So, if you see here, when a RAS or KRAS molecule, which has a GDP, gets phosphorylated, it becomes RAS containing a GTP, right? And then it is in the active state. Then what happens is it is not going to remain active forever. So a GTPase, right? A GTPase enzyme will come, and that GTPase protein will basically, because it's a ASE, so it will remove of this phosphate and it will convert this GTP back to GDP, right? So it will go, the RAS molecule will go back to the inactive state, and that's how the signaling will stop. But if RAS molecule is mutated, so certain pathogenic mutation make it in such a way that GTPase do not have the access of GTP molecule. So now if GTPase do not have the access, it cannot convert this GTP back to GDP, and so the RAS is continuously active, right? So this is a scenario here where KRAS is having a pathogenic mutation, and so it is right here it is firing the signaling pathway, and there is really no involvement of EGFR, right? So in such cases, even if you add cetuximab or panitumumab antibodies in the treatment, nothing is going to happen because the cancer is getting fired up. The signaling pathway is getting fired downstream from the level of KRAS, right? So, so one important thing which comes into picture is if you have an MSI stable patient, you need to know what is the mutational status of KRAS as well as BRAF molecule to decide whether you can really add cetuximab or not, right? The second example is, what if KRAS is wild type, it has no mutation, but actually BRAF is having a mutation V600E, and it's a known pathogenic mutation, right? Now, unlike KRAS, there is a very good targeted therapy for BRAF, which is encorafenib, right? So, you know, you can use in such kind of patients where MSI is stable and the patient has, you can use cetuximab, panitumumab, but along with that, you need to also add encorafenib to block BRAF molecule also. Otherwise, BRAF will trigger the signaling pathway from its own level, and cetuximab will not be any effective, right? So to make cetuximab effective, you need to also block BRAF by encorafenib. So now FDA has approved a combination of cetuximab and encorafenib in such kind of patients. So we do get such kind of patients often. This is an example, you know, of a report that we had taken out. So he was a 65-year-old male, and he had a CA rectum, and you know, it metastasized to liver, and you know, this patient had come, and in the report we suggested that, you know, the tumor had wild type KRAS, NRAS, and BRAF, right? So it had wild type everything, and the mutation was and the MSI was stable, right? So, you know, in such kind of patient, you know, then I write it that because KRAS, NRAS, and BRAF were wild type, so you can actually use cetuximab or panitumumab, and but because MSI is stable, the 5-year survival is about 82%, right? So, you know, this is how you know, based on how the patient looks like uh, in the molecular term, the doctor gives the necessary medication. Now, you know, in terms of sequencing, how does it really work, right? So, you know, if you see here in this picture, this is the KRAS molecule. This is a mutation landscape generated by the Cancer Genome Atlas. And if you see in the RAS molecule at the 12th amino acid position, right, at the 12th amino acid position, a glycine, a G, can get changed into various different amino acids, cytosine D, F, R, S, V, etc., right? And if that happens, the KRAS molecule becomes pathogenic, right? This is a pathogenic mutation. So the KRAS becomes oncoprotein. It becomes such that GTPase is not able to remove the extra phosphate group from the GTP, right? So, so this KRAS becomes active for a very, very long period of time. Now, the way you go about is you overlay the amino acid. If you had to do this test in your lab, you overlay the amino acid sequence onto the gene sequence. So, for example, KRAS protein starts with a methionine. Most of the proteins in human body, they start with the first amino acid is always methionine. So, this is the amino acid 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So this is a glycine, right? This is right here, G12, right? So this is a glycine, and the codon that codes for this glycine is GGT, right? GGT. So after GCT, you have a GGT, then you have a GGC, right? GCT, GGT, GGC. Now, when you do the sequencing of this tumor, you are already, because you already know that the 12th position amino acid is a position where, you know, the pathogenic mutation happens and the glycine changes into a different amino acid which becomes pathogenic. So let's say you did a Sanger sequencing and you got this sequence, right? And at the 12th position, which is GCT, GGT, GGC, right? If you see here, it was GCT, GGT, GGT, and GGC, right? Now, instead of GGT, it became TGT, right? If you can see in the slide, there is a very tiny this red peak, right? So this peak is actually now small, and you have a bigger black peak, which basically says that now G is now converted to T in this particular tumor cells. And what that means is, instead of GGT, which codes for a glycine, TGT codes for a cytosine. And because it codes for a cytosine, it converts this KRAS protein into an oncoprotein, right? And it doesn't respond to GTPase. And now it is active in for a very long period of time. So in such case, the tumor will be fired, or the signaling pathway will be fired right from the level of KRAS, right? So in such kind of patients, even if you give cetuximab or panitumumab, it won't help, right? So in such cases, what doctor would do is he will continue or she will continue with irinotecan, just the chemotherapeutic drug, right? So this was one part of the pathway. Now let's say, what if now the other part is, if the patient is MSI stable, it also tells you about the prognosis of the patient. The prognosis of the patient is not particularly good. Their 5-year survival is about 70 to 50%, right? So if you take 100 such patients, only 70 or to about 50 patients will survive until 5 years, right? Compare that with MSI high tumor. MSI stable tumor, poor prognosis. You need to look for KRAS status of mutational status of KRAS, BRAF, etc. to figure out what sort of therapy should be given to the patient versus MSI high patient, right? So the first thing first, the prognosis really improves. The 5-year survival rate goes, more than 90%, right? And then there are more complications as to, and these kind of tumors are often, these tumors will respond to immunotherapy, and we'll see how and why it responds to immunotherapy. Also, if the patient is MSI high and BRAF negative, then you should suspect for Lynch syndrome or a familial cancer, familial colon cancer in such kind of patients. Although their best 5-year survival would be pretty good, 93%. These are generally younger onset, right? So, they will start earlier in the life, and usually they have they are situated in the proximal colon. If you also need to, as a genetic counselor, you also need to take a very elaborate family history of this patient. Clinical geneticists or genetic counselors would do that, and they will figure out what's the status of the first degree relative, like the parents and the siblings and children, and the second degree relative, right? So they will figure out if any of those have cancers like colon cancer or rectal cancer or endometrial cancer or some other cancer which are associated with Lynch syndrome. And if so, then the doubt for doubt for Lynch syndrome becomes very, very high. But MSI high tumors are very different than MSI stable tumors that we just talked about, right? And if you see your NCCN guideline, here they have mentioned using therapies like nivolumab or pembrolizumab if the tumor is DMMR or MSI high. So here, we need to really understand what is MSI high, right? Why in such tumors we can use immunotherapy. So, to understand that, let's first go and check for, what is a mismatch repair mechanism, right? So MSI is microsatellite instability, or there is this MMR, mismatch repair mechanism, right? So if mismatch repair mechanism is broken, the tumor is MSI high. These are two different type of tests, but we will understand that once we understand this mismatch repair mechanism. Now what happens is, cells continuously keep on dividing, and during division the entire DNA replicates and divides into two daughter cells. And during these processes, many times there is a mismatch that happens. For example, there is a G, and against that you should have ideally had a C nucleotide, but instead of C nucleotide you got a T nucleotide, right? So now this is a mismatch. Now if we continue with this mismatch, what will happen is these two DNA molecules will separate into two daughter cells, and in one case you have a G, in other case you have a T, and again they will make their complementary DNA. So if you had a G, you will get the correct complementary nucleotide, which is C, but in case the daughter cell had a T, then the complementary sequence will have an A, right? So that mismatch will actually eventually then result in a bona fide mutation happening in the DNA, right? Now that shouldn't happen. So our body has a very nice repair mechanism. What happens is whenever there is a mismatch, so a mute S protein comes into picture. It comes and binds to this very close to the mismatch nucleotide, and then mute L joins and at the same site, and then there is an endonuclease activity. So they cut the DNA the DNA strand, and after cutting the DNA strand, an then there is these single stranded binding proteins. They will come and bind to the strand of DNA which has a mismatch, which is T, and then single stranded binding protein, they will recruit another protein called RECJ. So RECJ will delete all these this entire small fragment of DNA which has a mismatch also, and now there is a hole. So now that hole will be plugged by enzymes which are having DNA polymerase 3, and then the ligation will happen. So this is how the mismatch is identified, and then it is repaired, right? So that this mismatch doesn't ends up creating a mutation. Now how to figure out, now what happens is many times our mismatch repair mechanism goes bad, right? The entire mechanism, all the proteins which are involved in mismatch repair, they themselves get mutated. Now they are not well formed, so they are not able to do the correction of the mismatches, right? So what happens is in such kind of tumors, lot of mismatches are created, and whenever these cells divide, newer and newer mismatches are created, and then they keep getting converted into bona fide mutations. So the cells will keep on accumulating lots and lots and lots and lots of mutations, right? And then eventually these mutations can happen even within genes which are oncogenes. So they can activate, and then they will start creating the tumorigenesis, right? So how to figure out whether the mismatch repair mechanism is broken, right? So the best place to find is to figure out stretches in DNA where mismatches happen very frequently, right? So these stretches are called as microsatellites, microsatellite regions. These are microsatellite regions because they have tandem repeats of DNA. So for example, they will have 80, 80, 80, 80, 80, 80 kind of it will repeat multiple times. So let's say 15 times, 17 times, 24 times, like that. Or CG, 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 like that. So when DNA polymerase is trying to copy these tandem repeats, there is much higher probability that it will get confused and it will do a mismatch. So instead of an 80-80, it might put an 80-AA, right? So these kind of mismatches will happen more frequently in microsatellite regions. Now, if the mismatch repair mechanism is broken, then these microsatellites will not be repaired. So let's say if I had a microsatellite which was 10 nucleotide big, let's say this brown one was 10 nucleotide big. Now there is an extra nucleotide. There are 3-4 extra nucleotides added. So instead of 10, it will become 14 nucleotide long, right? But because my microsatellite, if my mismatch repair mechanism was active, it would have repaired it. So my, the microsatellite would have again gone back to 10 nucleotides. If my mismatch repair mechanism is broken, I won't be able to repair it. So instead of 10 nucleotide, now it will be 14 nucleotide. It will be longer, right? So what typically, what is done in this assay is that you take the microsatellite regions of tumor and that of cell, and then you compare. So you take the blood and you PCR amplify the microsatellite region, right? So let's say we had two regions. One was the brown and one was the red one. And similarly in tumor also, you amplify the exact same, you PCR amplify the exact same microsatellite regions. Now, because the tumor, in tumor, what happened was a couple of nucleotides were deleted, right? few nucleotides were deleted and they never got repaired. So I have a shorter microsatellite region in the tumor compared to blood, because the tumor cells do not have the intact mismatch repair mechanism, right? So when I amplify both these microsatellite regions from the blood and from the tumor, and if I then run it on a gel, on a DNA gel, so what happens is the DNA moves from the negative charge to the positive charge, right? The longer the DNA or the larger the DNA, it will move slowly, it will drag. The shorter the DNA, it will move faster to the positive end. Now, because my tumor microsatellite regions were shortened, so they will run faster than the blood microsatellite regions, right? So that's why my blue peak is running faster than the brown peak, which is from blood, and my green peak, which is shorter in tumor, is running faster than the red peak, which is longer in the blood. Blood signifies a normal cell, right? Normal cell of our body. So I can clearly say that the mismatch repair mechanism in the tumor cells have gone bad. That is why they are not able to repair the microsatellite regions, and that's why I am seeing a difference in the microsatellite region's length between the tumor and the blood, right? So if you see the actual data, it looks somewhat like this. So there are five such microsatellite regions that we observe and we compare. And out of five, if at least two of them are showing mismatch, right? At least two of them should show mismatch. Then we classify such tumors as mismatch, as MSI high tumor, microsatellite instability high. If only one microsatellite region is showing a mismatch, then it is MSI low. Or if none of them show, then it is MSI stable, right? So this is how we classify MSI high or MSI stable. So, how does it look like? I mean, if we see this patient, so we had written here, right, that the patient was KRAS, NRAS, and BRAF wild type. So that's the reason why you could give cetuximab and panitumumab. But he was also MSI stable, right? So MSI stable, this is how we report. Out of five loci or out of five microsatellites regions, we did not find anything unstable. So none of the regions were unstable. So it is actually an MSI stable tumor, right? And because it's an MSI stable tumor, we cannot use the immunotherapies, right? So we suggest that here the patient's tumor is MSI stable, hence usage of immunotherapy may not be suggested, right? And here the way we compare is we have the sizes of these microsatellite regions in the normal tissue, which is blood, and in the tumor tissue, which is our colon tumor. And then these are the 5 or 6 microsatellite regions: BAT25, BAT26, D2S, APC, D5S, and D17S, right? But here we do not see any difference in the length, and that's why we classify this tumor as MSI stable, right? Now the question is, why, so what's the implication of MSI stable or MSI high, on actual patient management? How does it changes it? So one thing is that MSI high or MSI high tumors suggest favorable prognosis. Their 5-year survival is about 90%, which is much higher than MSI stable tumor. Also, MSI high tumors, they will respond to immunotherapy such as nivolumab or pembrolizumab, right? And why does that happen, right? So, it's kind of, I try to make a diagram out of it. And so let's say, you have this tumor DNA, and in this tumor DNA, there is these mutations. And because, our mismatch repair mechanism is broken, so in the tumor DNA, we will have a lot of these mismatches, right? These red lines, right? These reddish lines are the mutations. And because there are a lot of mutations, so normally what happens in any cell, the DNA will code for, you know, mRNA to proteins, and then some amount of these proteins are chopped. And then these proteins are the fragments of these proteins are loaded on major histocompatibility molecules, and then they are displayed right here, like, you know, this is the MHC molecule, and the protein domains are displayed outside the cell. And what happens is T cells, they come and they will check it out, you know, the proteins which are loaded on MHC molecules. And if they are the self cells, T cells won't do anything. But if the T cells detect any protein fragment which do not look like self, and, you know, they look like foreign protein, then the T cells will kill the cells which are displaying these proteins, right? So this is how our immune response works, and the cancer cells, you know, can get killed very easily, if, you know, because, so in our case, because the mismatch repair mechanism is all broken, so our tumor DNA has created lots and lots of such mutated genes, and these mutated genes will produce proteins which will have a lot of differences than the normal protein, right? Because the DNA sequence is changed, so the protein is also changed, amino acid sequences are changed, and when these protein domains are chopped and loaded on MHC molecules, the T cells can easily see that, okay, these are foreign proteins, so let me kill these cells, and these cells are cancerous cells, right? So our body can launch a very effective immune response against cancerous cells. And that's a different matter, that cancer cells evade this immune response, and how we can use immunotherapy to you know, again launch a very aggressive immune response to it. But this is the basic mechanism as to how T cells can recognize cancer cells which are displaying, you know, foreign proteins now. So what happens is, when this kind of thing, uh, if you see this picture, we have a T cell which is naive T cell, and that naive T cell basically sees the foreign antigen loaded on a major histocompatibility molecule, and then it becomes an activated T cell, right? And this activated T cell will have a protein on the surface which is called as PD-1, right? PD-1, and cancer cells have the ligand for PD-1, which is called as PD-L1, right? So our T cell will start, you know, looking for the cancer cells based on the antigen what it had seen, and the moment it sees a cancer cell, like here you can see that the target, this is the target cell and this is the T cell, and within minutes, right, within minutes of seeing a target or the cancer cell, the T cell starts killing it. Like, you know, in less than 30 minutes, the target cell or the cancer cell is killed, right? And there are mechanisms how T cell kills it. Now, while the T cell is bound to the cancer cell, right, the PD-1 molecule, which is expressed on the T cell, binds to the PD-L1 molecule, right, which is expressed on the cancer cell, right? PD-1 on T cell, PD-L1 on cancer cell. And when PD-1 binds to PD-L1, then basically it causes inhibition of the entire signaling. So let's say this was the cancer cell, right? This is the cancer cell and this is our T cell, right? So T cell is, this is the T cell and the upper one is the cancer cell. Now T cell and cancer cell are binding because T cell is able to recognize this antigen. And then in the downstream signaling pathway, it will cause expression of a lot of other proteins such as granzymes and a lot of other perforin protein, etc., which basically enter in the cancer cell and then they kill it. But what cancer cell cleverly do is they will bind this PD-L1 to PD-1, and this binding actually causes stopping of the entire cytotoxic mechanism, right? So it's a way for cancer cell to evade the immune response, right? When the T cell is trying to launch the killing machinery, binding of PDL1 to PD1 will do a feedback inhibition, and it will stop the response. Now we want the killing response to continue. So what drug companies did was they created antibodies which will bind to PD1. Now if the antibodies are binding to PD1, PD1 cannot bind to PDL1. And if that attachment never happens, this feedback inhibition, that doesn't happen, right? So this inhibitory response doesn't happen. So the T cell will continue launching the killer response on the cancer cells, and it will keep on killing cancer cells, and the tumor will regress, right? I hope you got it. It was a little bit tortuous, a little confusing. Uh, so this is the reason why if the patient is MSI high, that we say that okay, the patient will respond to immunotherapies such as pembrolizumab or nivolumab, which are nothing but monoclonal antibodies against the PD1 molecule, right? And such patients are also are also candidates for for exploring more for Lynch syndrome. So these are like familial cancers which run in the family of these patients, and and such patients will frequently develop colorectal tumors or endometrial tumors in females. A large number of females actually report development of endometrial tumors. And so one of the characteristic, the first test that can indicate you that the patient might be having this colorectal tumor because of Lynch syndrome is if the patient is young, if the patient got MSI high, but BRAF is negative, right? There is no mutation in BRAF. That is a telltale that, probably it is because of the Lynch syndrome. There is more to this. Lynch syndrome itself is is a topic to discuss. So maybe I'll try to take it in the next talk. But so this is how we manage two separate type of tumors. So as I'll go back again and I'll say that if the patient is having advanced colorectal cancers, unresectable, metastatic, then basically we group the tumor into four classes. First of all, divided into two blocks. One which is MSI stable or microsatellite instability stable, and other is MSI high, microsatellite instability is high. If the patient is MSI stable, then the prognosis is poor. 5-year survival is less, about 70 to 50%. And in such cases, doctor can give, along with the chemotherapy irinotecan, doctor can also give cetuximab and panitumumab, which will block the EGFR molecule. But if there is a mutation in KRAS, and then you cannot give cetuximab and panitumumab. Also, if there is a mutation in BRAF but not in KRAS, then in encorafenib along with cetuximab, that was a treatment. And in the second part, where if the tumors are MSI high, then again either the tumors could be MSI. So the first thing first, prognosis becomes very good. 5-year survival is always more than 90%. Now again in this class also there are two segments. Either the patient is MSI high but BRAF negative. So in such patients, if they are younger and if they have a family history, you should doubt on this Lynch syndrome, that this tumor is because of Lynch syndrome. And then there are 4 proteins as we discussed, MLH1, MSH2, MSH6, PMS2. I won't go into details, but a sequencing of these 4 genes as well as EpCAM, that's the 5th gene, should be done to figure out if the pathogenic mutation has happened in these genes, and that will be conclusive, confirmatory evidence that you have a patient where the colorectal cancer is because of Lynch syndrome. The second is MSI high but BRAF positive. So, these are tumors where MSI is high. There is a problem in the mismatch repair mechanism, but it is not because of Lynch syndrome, right? It is completely sporadic, and these tumors will very, very nicely, they will respond to immunotherapy such as pembrolizumab or nivolumab. Yeah, so I think we are already at 9 o'clock. So I'll just, I would want to acknowledge my lab people in the molecular biology laboratory wet work, Khushbu, Rushvi, and Smita. They are the backbone of the oncology clinical molecular assays like Sanger sequencing, real-time PCRs, next generation sequencing. Our bioinformatician Nikunj, and the histopathology department, Dr. Bhavna does the histopathology of our tumors. We have collaborating medical oncologists with whom very closely we collaborate. We work with a lot of oncologists, but these oncologists, where we very closely work. Dr. Nirmal Rawat, who works at Bhaktivedanta Hospital, Mumbai. Dr. Kunal Jain and Dr. Devinder Paul are in American Oncology Institute in Ludhiana, which is in Punjab. With this, we come to the end, and this is a very beautiful picture that I found on internet, where you could see such green, such lush green. Sri Lanka is such a beautiful country, and there is this faint connection, and I feel that that connection should always be there. We should always stay connected, and I really thank Human Genetic Unit, Faculty of Medicine, University of Colombo. Thank you also to Human Genetic Society, and really thanks to Dr. Nirmala Sirisena for giving such a wonderful opportunity to me to interact with you all. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Siddharth. That was a very excellent talk and very clear and comprehensive. So thank you very much. Happy to see that you have recovered fully and you're back on your feet. And thanks for the time and contributions you have made towards this presentation. So the floor is now open for any questions or comments. If you have anything to clarify, or if you need to ask a question, you're free to do so. You can unmute yourself or type it into the chat. And I think Dr. Siddharth would be happy to address that.
Yeah, I'll be, I can't promise I can answer all the questions, but I'll be happy to contribute. It was a bit complex, and I just couldn't touch Lynch syndrome in details. That was something that I wanted to, but I guess maybe next time we can try that. But you have any question, please feel free to ask.
Yes, Dr. Siddharth, just one thing I want to ask about this new concept of the tumor mutational burden, the TMB,
yeah,
and its role, I mean, its usefulness in selecting immunotherapy. So how far has that been utilized? Yeah, if you can just comment on that.
Yeah, so the microsatellite instability, tumor mutational burden, and PDL1 assay. These three things overlap a lot because there is MSI and TMB definitely overlap a lot. If we see the mechanism, that kind of explains, because microsatellite, if it is microsatellite instability high or MSI high, that means the mismatch repair mechanism is broken. And when the mismatch repair mechanism breaks down, then the cell accumulates a lot of mutations. And that really is nothing but tumor mutational burden. So how many number of mutations per megabases, per MB? That is the calculation. So the way TMB is calculated is you sequence the, you extract the tumor genome, you sequence it, and then you compare it with the normal blood cells DNA, and then you see where all the changes have happened, and then you simply count those changes, and see how many changes or mutations you see within 1 megabases. And that, if the value is more than 10, then it's kind of high. So there is some variation in that based on the type of assay, the NGS assay that you use. People are using different numbers to classify that this is TMB high or TMB not high, right? Now, if it is TMB high, then, again, it's the same thing, that if there are a lot of mutations, then, a lot of foreign proteins are produced, and these foreign proteins will be expressed as part of MHC molecule, and T cells can recognize them and they can launch an immune response. So if TMB is high, then the tumor will respond to immunotherapies. Now, why? So, it pretty much goes hand in hand with MSI. If MSI is high, it is exactly the same mechanism. But, MSI is not the only reason why number of mutations may increase. There are some other molecular mechanisms also which may lead to increased number of mutations, right? And that is why, sometimes you may have a TMB high tumor, which may not be MSI high, which may be MSI stable also. So, people use these criteria, but, there is still a lot of overlap between MSI as well as TMB. But many times when oncologists, they are looking at immunotherapy, then apart from MSI, they also ask for like the tumor mutational burden, and just to correlate that, MSI is also high and TMB is also high, and if there is a large expression of PD1, so PDL1, so these kind of tumors will definitely respond to immunotherapy. That becomes important because immunotherapy is kind of expensive.
Yes, thank you very much for that clear explanation. Any other questions or comments?
Also, if you find that the way I try to explain is not a great way, or if you want a modification or a change in that, please message or email to Dr. Sirisena, and I'll get to know, and accordingly I'll make changes for the third talk.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Siddharth. I think it's very clear and comprehensive. So I think they will have access to the recorded version also, so they can always go back and listen to it at their own pace. Okay, so in the absence of any other questions or comments, I would like to bring this meeting to a close today. And thank you very much, Dr. Siddharth, for joining with us today also, and for that beautiful talk and explanations given on colorectal cancers. And thanks to all the participants for joining with us online. And thanks to Dr. Chamika from Health Informatics Society for providing the Zoom platform for today's webinar. As you know, recorded versions of these webinar series will be available at the Human Genetics Society website. So you're welcome to visit the HGS website. The previous webinar is already available. It has been uploaded to the website, so you can listen to that. And in a couple of days, we'll be uploading to this webinar as well. So the next and the last talk will be next week. That will be on the 9th of December. So that will be next Wednesday, and Dr. Siddharth will be concluding this series and talking about breast and thyroid cancers. So thank you everyone for participating, and thank you, Dr. Siddharth, and we'll meet up next week. Thank you and good night.
Good night.